Okay, welcome back everybody. Welcome back to the plenary room. Okay, welcome back. I hope it's been a busy and useful afternoon for everyone. Kind of people just coming in, just shh for a moment. Fantastic, thank you very much. We saw this morning how much this topic means to everybody, and that coupled with the support, especially for our conference ambassadors, was really important and wonderful to see. And that also coupled with all the know-how that's been shared in the sessions and the ambition of everyone in the room is a wonderful cocktail for more progress. So let's keep that spirit going. This session is extremely indispensable at a conference like this because we're talking about resources, we're talking about money. As I said earlier, none of the goals that you want achieved here, that we want achieved, are going to be realized without adequate resources. So we're going to talk to some people here on stage about just that, the strategies of getting it, and why there isn't more of it, more easily accessible. We're going to do this with another panel this afternoon. So please help me in giving the following panelists a big round of applause. The first is the co-executive director of Mamakash, Happy Mwende Kinyili. Happy, where are you? Yes. Hey, Happy, can you sit in the light blue? Yeah, there we go. Fantastic. Next to you is the International Program Director for the Gender, Racial and Ethnic Justice, or Gender, Racial and Ethnic Justice at the Ford Foundation, Monica Alleman. Monica, welcome. Sit next to Happy, please. Thank you. The AG coordinator at AFAWA, the Affirmative Finance Action for Women in Africa, at the African Development Bank Group, Melissa Bascrou. Melissa, welcome. And Melissa, if you could sit in the pink one, no, the yellow one, I believe. That would be okay. Sorry. I'm the one I've got to sit on there and on there, so I need to shuffle around. Next up, we have the practice manager of the Global Finance Facility at the World Bank, Luc Laviolette. Luc, welcome. Actually, you need to sit next to Melissa, great. And then we have the country representative for UN Women in Moldova, Dominika Stojanowska. Dominika, welcome. Oh, just sit there. I think I've messed it up, doesn't matter. And the ambassador of Canada to the Netherlands and permanent representative to the OPCW, Hugh Adset. Hugh, welcome. Go for it. You sit there. You're welcome. Okay, this session is not only going to be me talking to these people and us having a lovely conversation here, but it's also going to be interactive. So if you haven't already done so, please grab your phones, log into the network app so that you can respond to some questions that we will have for you. Before we hear from our panelists, I would like to put all of our conversations here into a kind of sharp context by sharing a short video featuring two of our conference ambassadors. So may I have your full attention, please, from Leading from the South, Anisha Chu, and from Urgent Action Fund, Latin America and the Caribbean, Sofia Marcia.
Flexible funding is needed when a context of crisis is happening. In recent days, Miriam Miranda, coordinator of the Organización Fraternal Negra de Honduras, suffered an attempt to assassination in her house in Vallecito, Colón, a sacred territory for the Garifuna people. When a defender or an activist is facing a context of violence and she needs to relocate, we as an Urgent Action Fund are supporting them, providing grants, rapid response in context of crisis.
As a feminist fund, we recognize that resources are a political issue. Feminist activism continues to be the most unrecognized and uncompensated form of labor today. We love creating martyrs. We love glorifying the suffering of activists on the ground without actually standing by them and standing in solidarity with them. Solidarity doesn't mean just 2 words. Solidarity means showing up.
This is a feminist gathering for the right to decide. In Honduras, abortion is penalized even in cases of rape. That is so important. When the feminist movement is having an opportunity to make advocacy action, they need to have gatherings, spaces to be together, and to demand together access to the rights. We want to achieve a region where women, trans, and non-binary activists and defenders be safer. They can have access to flexible and agile resources to safeguard their life in context of violence. They can take advantage of the opportunities and their voices can be hearing.
So how can we show up for feminist movements, for feminist institutions and activists in times of crisis? Resources, I mean funding, I mean money, is a critical part of it, especially for those in the global south and east. And that needs to be recognized. I will say it again, it is a political issue, it is a right.
Perhaps we could start by just going down the line and taking some first impressions from what Anisha and Sophia eloquently they painted a picture for us. What impressions struck you the most? Let's start with you, Happy.
Thank you so much, and thanks for having me and the voices that are behind me on this space and on this panel. I think the point that Anisha makes, that funding is a political issue, is what sits with me. Money sits in certain places because the world has been deliberately designed that way. And our work is to disrupt that, to move money from the places where the world has decided it should be to the places we know it needs to be to make change in this world. So it is a political issue. Money doesn't sit where it sits as an accident. It's meant to be that way.
Clear, thank you very much. Yeah.
Well, hello everyone, and good to be in this conversation and good to be in this community. I will say, well, first of all, I have huge respect for both the Origin Action Fund and the Women's Fund Asia, as well as the entire network of women's funds that have been responding to the multiple crises in the world and continue to do so with great dignity and with limited resources. So the first takeaway for me is a moment of pride and a moment of reconnection and commitment to those institutions. And the second thing I will say is it is very important for us to continue to invest in movements, but also in institutions, and we do that very much at the Ford Foundation. And the best way to do that is the way that they were referring to, flexible, long-term support in a manner that allows institutions to do what they need to do in moments of crisis, like the ones we are in today, but frankly, every single day.
Okay, thank you, Monica. Hugh?
Thank you, and it's a real pleasure to be here. It's a real pleasure to be here with this panel as well. I've got to agree with everything I just heard a moment ago, and I'd like to add one thing that struck me when I was watching the video, which is the courage of those who are defending women's rights and taking feminist action. And I think the importance of supporting those who are doing that to bring real support to the individuals that are carrying on that activity as human rights defenders. I think that's an important part of the contributions that we need to make.
Okay, Dominika?
Yes, thank you. First, I want to greet everyone who still has the interest to listen to us at the last panel. I think for me, I agree fully with my colleagues. Two important facts which strikes me. Yes, it's a political issue on the funding. And the second about the activists and the feminist organization being on the ground and being with people, being there and living the realities people are living and fighting for the agenda.
Okay. Thank you. Melissa?
Thank you very much. I would like just to perhaps complement what was said before. I think, thinking of it from an economic vantage point, think about, women's rights and cannot be done without thinking about women economic empowerment. So I believe being able to move, this funding where it's really needed, meaning in the hands of the woman, the beneficiaries, is critical. And I believe, having these conversations that we're about to have on how we can push further and shake the status quo to make sure that the beneficiaries who actually need it the most can benefit from all the funding that is being mobilized by the donors and the MDBs makes a lot of sense. So thanks for having me, and look forward to the conversation.
Yep, thanks very much. Luke, what struck you the most?
I was really struck by I was struck by one thing and I was reflecting on another. So I was struck by the sense of urgency, which I definitely share. We work on health of women, children, adolescents, and today 800 women will die from childbirth-related causes that are entirely preventable, and so we need this sense of urgency, which I got from the video. I was also reflecting on the need to focus ultimately on improving the welfare and the lives and the economic empowerment of women, right? And that there are multiple channels to do that. And and to your point about the money being in some places for political reasons, the bulk of the money is actually currently in governments, right? And how do we work with governments to unlock that money for more productive and equitable uses? That's what I was thinking about.
Okay, thanks.
And I guess I have one more point. You saw in that video the face, the image of Berta Cáceres, who is an indigenous woman who was murdered for believing in her and her community's right to land and for a clean environment and a safe environment. And I think that is very much at the center of why we are here today, because it is about the activists, because it is about our communities, because many of us are on the front lines and are being killed every single day for believing what we believe, because we are women, because we have a certain gender expression. And it is very important to not lose track of the situation of women human rights defenders, including trans women.
Thank you for underlining that. I think it goes under the radar. It is literally an existential crisis for so many people around the world. Happy, paint a picture for us as to what does it actually look like? How difficult, how easy is it for women's organizations feminist organizations to get access to money now?
When you ask that, I feel in my body, because of what Monica has said, and your question makes me feel, I feel feelings, many feelings. And I say that because we know that 61% of Black feminist groups globally have annual budgets less than $50,000. We know 59% of Black feminist groups around the world have never received co-funding. We know 72% of global LBQ groups have budgets of less than 50,000. We know less than 1% of ODA funding goes directly to feminist groups around the world. Folks are not getting money. They don't have resources to do the work that they need to do to survive. It's real, it's urgent, it's multi-layered. Each year, Mama Cash, the fund I work for, we have an open call for applications. And we receive over 2,000 applications every year. And we are only able to fund 25. From 2,000 to 25. And it's not because we don't want to or we are not able to, it's because we don't have the funding to move it to groups. And there are groups who are out there doing the work. I have conversations sometimes with funders who are like, oh, but there's no groups out there that can receive our funding. I'm like, that's a lot of bullshit. There's groups that are organized, that are actively fighting again for their survival, for the survival of their communities. They're able, they're ready, they're doing the work without the money. Despite it, we're holding the lines. And they're ready, they're able to receive the funding. It's just all the bullshit that is in place that prevents the money from moving.
Okay, we've got to take a bit of a deeper dive on the bullshit. What exactly, what does that entail? What are the biggest reasons why it's just 25 organizations that you're able to finance? What's in the way? What are the obstacles?
So a lot of the funding that even we receive is so layered with administrative burdens to prevent the money from moving further. So I think most of the funding that we receive is based on the premise that we're out here to steal that money. And so they set up a whole mechanism to figure out how can they keep us from stealing that money. And I talk about us because it's black folk like me, right? Like, oh gosh, I have feelings. That's why I said it earlier. I have feelings and they'll show up.
Let them go.
Let them go?
No.
Yeah,
Bring them in.
Thank you.
Let me just say, I'll let you continue, but I think that's the crossroads of this whole conference. It's emotion and it's politics, right?
Yeah.
And while this conference is absolutely intended to make us think, it is also to make us feel. So feel away. I completely agree.
I will. And so everything is set up that. So from the audit protocols, where you have to account for every single euro that has been spent, with the assumption that the money is going to be stolen. It's not possible to keep that up unless you have a whole infrastructure set up to sustain, not to move the money, just to figure out how can we count the money as it's supposed to be counted. You have all these PMEL frameworks around trying to show how relevant and how important your work is. Not because your work isn't important. This is, again, I go back to, it is about surviving. So of course the work is important. Of course the work is relevant. But you have to prove it constantly, over and over again.
So where is that lack of trust coming from then? Institutions such as?
All of us.
That one I can't answer. That one I don't know. Where is it?
All of us.
All of us, right?
Yes.
Because it is based on that. It is based on the premise of we cannot be trusted. So, and again, I keep saying us because it's us. It's like we are the folk. We, as Mama Cash, we have to constantly prove ourselves as a feminist fund that we are legitimate, that we can do the work that we are supposed to do, and you're not in it to steal.
Yeah.
And when we stand, and we are able to, because we are based in Amsterdam, so when they see, the Netherlands, okay, cool. You all are a bit more trustworthy than, say, Agenda Action Fund Africa, because their address is in Nairobi, right? So we as Mama Cash, we are trusted a little bit more, but not enough, right? And we do that. What we do in turn is we say, because we trust our partners, you can trust them, right? Doesn't always work out. There's governments who will still ask us to count down to the euro. There's private foundations. I'm not saying it's only governments, even private foundations make us count down to the euro. So we exist to try and absorb as much of that administrative burden as we can, but we can't absorb it all because sometimes it's just not possible.
Okay,
for example, there's one of our donors who would like us to audit every grant that is above 50,000 euro. In a world where 50,000 barely pays for rent, that means auditing every single grant that moves out of our office.
Yeah.
To what end? And if we calculate the human hours that are spent reporting, auditing, like cumulatively, and we're up against the world.
Yeah, I mean, I feel a bit sorry for him, but our only government representative here, Hugh, Canada.
I'm glad you started by saying you felt sorry for me. But I wanted to start actually in all seriousness with, I think what's the fourth R of the 4 R's that we're talking about, which is the reality check.
Excuse me, sir. It's time to address the elephant in the room. I thank you, Happy, thank you, Monica, and all the feminist fans today, and all the supportive people and conversations we had. But we cannot be having this conversation about feminist foreign policy without Palestine.
Let me just, hold on, let me give you a microphone. Let me just give you a microphone because it's a bit awkward.
Without Palestine!
What do you want to?
No FFP without Palestine!
Oh,
no.
Okay, no microphone?
You
don't need a microphone. Okay, all right.
Yes. So, ceasefire! Ceasefire now! Ceasefire now! Ceasefire now!
Okay.
Ceasefire now!
And a round of applause, I think, is also due. Okay, thank you very much. I think it's also important to share to everyone that there is an opportunity to speak also at Speaker's Corner. There's a space here in the conference hall to have a more in-depth discussion as well, because it's one thing to make a statement, which also, as we said this morning, it suits this event and this space, but it's another to have a more in-depth discussion. So if anyone else wants to have that, there is a dedicated space for it as well. So anyway, okay. Hugh, you were talking about, well, I put a target on your back to some extent, because we were talking about a lack of trust and too much bureaucracy and red tape, and you wanted to talk about the reality check.
I did want to talk about the reality check part, because I think that's an important part of the conversation. And I think part of what governments need to do is to listen to what we're hearing. And so let me just give a tiny example from the Canadian experience with our own program, Women's Voice in Leadership. So this was very much a flagship initiative, part of Canada's Feminist International Assistance Program, policy launched in 2018. And we just went through an evaluation of the program recently to see what had worked and what hadn't worked. There were lots of things that I think we had good responses on, things that worked well, and between that program and a number of other programs, well, that program in particular, we've been able to fund more than 1,500 local women's rights organizations in over 30 countries since 2018. But we also heard of challenges, and you were referring to some of those challenges as well. So the reporting burden, that's something that came across in the evaluation, was that women's rights organizations, feminist activists, found the reporting burdens to be heavy. We also heard comments about the need for longer term and core funding as well. And we also heard comments about the need to think of risk differently, and to approach risk in this context differently as well. And so there is a process of reflection on this. We're going through a process in our country of a 5-year review of our grants and contributions policies. And so this feedback, I think, will be important, and it will be part of those considerations as well.
To be fair, I mean, Hugh, we heard the word urgency. We talked about people literally dying as a result of not being able to get the support and access to resources. And you're talking about a 5-year review?
Well, a 5-year review of the policies that govern grants and contributions, but I think some of the things that we've heard already will be taken into account and will be taken on board as well. Because we've heard that. We recognize that there are challenges there. We have responsibilities, of course, to follow the rules that are given to us that govern the way that we can spend money, and I think probably other donors have similar rules as well. But I think what we hear and what we see is this need, if we are actually going to, as we said at the time we launched the program, try to do development differently, then we need to take some of these lessons learned and take them into account.
Okay. I want to bring in Luc.
So as I was listening to Hugh, I was thinking that this is an entire system of financing that is kind of geared in one direction, right? And it's been for decades now geared on micromanaging, frankly. And I was reflecting on the experience. So the Global Financing Facility sits within the World Bank. And so we work within the World Bank systems and rules. And one of the big shifts that I've appreciated in the last 5 to 7 years is a new instrument, a funding instrument for governments, but I think we should consider using that more for civil society as well, which is what we call a program for results. So the focus on the audits is actually auditing whether the results have been achieved or not, and the extent to which they've been achieved, and it totally changes the dialogue that we have, for example, with governments in this case, from one where there was an inordinate amount of time spent on specific transactions of procurement to focusing on were the results results achieved, to what extent, and then payments are actually made against those results. And the procurement people end up now focusing on building the procurement systems of the country rather than auditing constantly. So it's an important shift in the mindset, I think, that probably would be useful also in the financing of non-state actors as well.
It feels like it's something that speaks to the reducing red tape, for instance. I'm not sure if it speaks to the lack of trust that you're talking about.
Because what you're describing for me is just a different control mechanism, because it still remains about controlling. So if it is actually you get paid against results, it's still a control mechanism. In many ways, I say this. Yeah, so to the point, I won't go this way, I'll go a different way. So the point that you're making that there are rules. For example, a lot of the reasons, and we're talking about this behind stage, is a lot of the reasons that you ask us to report the way you're reporting is because you in turn have to be accountable to Parliament, because Parliament has to be accountable to its taxpayers, right? So 2 issues with that. One is the questions you're asking us don't actually help you answer the questions you need to answer in Parliament. You're asked in Parliament, is this funding making change? What we're counting is how many people came to a meeting. People coming to a meeting doesn't mean change has happened. It's meant people have come to a meeting. And when we're suggesting to you all that there are other frames in which we as feminists have been actively working to make sure that we know how to measure change. We know how to do it. You just don't agree with our ways of measuring change. And that's a fundamental issue, like our ways of measuring and understanding results, because we are as interested in figuring out, is the work we're doing making a change and making a difference? So that's one piece. I think the second part is there's a lot of questions that come to Parliament around, how is development assistance going, et cetera, et cetera. Most governments don't talk about funding going to security. Those conversations either happen behind closed doors or the questions are never asked. Yet there's more money that goes to fund military and so on and so on. So why is it so important to be accountable to taxpayers when the money is going to black and brown people to keep them alive, but not when the money is going to black and brown people to kill them? Like, what's the difference?
Melissa, are these? Do you recognize? I mean, what's the gender lens at the ADB, at the African Development Bank?
Thank you so very much. And I've heard, key words here and challenges that actually resonate to the work we do. Happy was mentioning, this lack of trust. We also heard, the sense of urgency that we need to take into account to make sure that we can channel funding in the hands of women SMEs and women organizations that actually support, the delivery and strengthen the capacities of these women SMEs. So to answer to your question, at the African Development Bank, we have this initiative called Affirmative Finance for Women in Africa, AFAWA. That main objective is really to, unlock access to funding to the women SMEs, because as we speak, there is still a gigantic access to finance gap, which is estimated at $42 billion for the continent only. And, we know that women entrepreneurs represent over 80%. Actually, over 80% of women on the continent are self-employed entrepreneurs compared to 45% worldwide. So, we have this data, we have this evidence, and as our President Adesina, the President of the African Development Bank, like to say, no bird can fly with one wing. So we really need to make sure that women can really be part of this development. So what we do through AFAWA, we really work with financial institutions to make sure that women can have a fair take of the pie, and we work on we have developed this risk share mechanism. Because the collateral, access to collateral is a big issue. Women are really limited in their capacity, of accessing finance because they don't have this collateral. So the de-risking mechanism that we've put in place really helps, towards, unlocking additional funding. But we also do a lot of work, with the financial institution to change the risk perception. We talked about trust, But most of the time, despite the fact that women have the capacity to repay, and actually 90% of women repay their loans, but we are still having this conversation with bankers, with financial institutions, say that they need to de-risk the woman market. But in fact, I believe what we are de-risking is perhaps the stereotypes and the lack of trust in vis-à-vis the woman market.
So, but I mean, within both of you kind of work on, like, I don't know, startups is how I can think of them, within huge institutions. And it sounds like you're trying to operate a little bit differently, albeit with the same controls that Happy is unhappy with. Sorry, that must have been done 1,000 times.
I had to go there, I see it.
But, I mean, bank-wide, Happy said it, the system is broken, and you're both operating within that system. So what scope is there for, is anyone else in the bank really taking attention of what you're doing and saying, you know, we need to follow their example? Melissa, Luc, sorry. Do you want to start?
Yeah, I can start. I mean, you mean at the level of the institution, what is the momentum when it comes to... I think there is a great momentum because, you know, in addition to this work, the specific work that we're doing with AFAWA, supporting financial institutions, in our operations and throughout, you know, it's really cross-cutting. We are being very intentional in mainstreaming gender, you know, in the projects that we have. So we want to make sure that, you know, we find and we reflect on the opportunities, and doing that, we need to think about the business case. I think that was already mentioned in some of the parallel sessions this morning. But when we discuss and engage with clients, we are making the business case for them to include opportunities for women. Should that be at the employment level? Should that be at the decision-making level? Because we need women as leaders in this organization to change the status quo for women in general, to make sure that these institutions are being intentional about increasing women's participation in the workplace, ensuring that they can put in place, you know, favorable policies that make sure that, you know, we can have more women in male-dominated sectors, and there are so many. So as we work with these clients, you know, we are mainstreaming gender, you know.
And at the World Bank, I mean,
so no, we have the convergence of, in my view, two really exciting moments at the World Bank right now. So we have new leadership. We have a new president that brings an efficiency focus from having his background in the private sector, and also that sense of urgency around really moving the needles quickly, at this, and taking a serious look at processes and simplifying. And it does take us too long right now to get things done. At the same time, we have a new gender policy, gender strategy that is at advanced stages of development and is actually currently in the stage of public consultations. So invitation to anyone who wants to provide feedback if you haven't done that already. It has a focus on reducing and eliminating gender-based violence, a strong focus on elevating human capital through with a gender lens, the expanding of economic opportunities that we just heard about, and then something that's actually quite new for the bank, engaging women as leaders. And so within the group that I work in at the Global Financing Facility, we have a program that engages African women as leaders within the health sector. It's training, but it's also coaching. It's helping to the extent we can the work environment that they work within, because when we look at data on the health sector, 70% of the total staff are women. In senior positions, 25%. There's a real disconnect, both in terms of their opportunity, but also there's evidence that shows that when women are leading either in ministries or in villages, there's a serious acceleration of outcomes that we all want, right? Yeah. And so that's some of what's happening within the World Bank right now.
Okay, Dominica, from bearing in mind what Happy was talking about in terms of this hierarchy potentially of who gets more red tape and who doesn't, is that something that you kind of see, that you feel happens?
Well, I mean, I agree fully with what was raised, that actually it's a sense of urgency, and it's really challenging also for the organizations. I was looking at the figures, and I'll come to your questions, but I was looking at the figures, and it was mentioned of official assistance and how much it went actually in women's organization, but one figure that strikes more even is that like only 0.3% of the official development assistance went to women's and grassroots organizations in fragile context, in crisis. And we all know, and we have seen also from the videos, who is first on the front lines when crisis happened. And I lived that through myself last year when the war in Ukraine started and the flow of refugees was moving through Moldova. We've seen that. It's the first day, it's women's organizations, it's feminist organizations which are at they were at the borders. They really, in a way, exhausted all their reserve funds, small that they had, and even those that, like minimal funds that they had, they started even collecting funds to be able to provide that support. Mm-hmm. So we know what is there. It is a challenge. There are some positive practices that we've seen. I think working for UN Women on the ground, we are constantly actually engaged on that advocacy and support to really channel that voice and provide the support for the organization that they really deserve in the sense of channeling the financial assistance. But we've seen, for example, the global funds, like the first fund for the Fund for Gender Equality, which started in 2006, and which was channeling really funding for the women's organizations. And what was very important about that, this was like what still echoes. It was the grants which were given for organizations for core support, but also for shaping projects and supporting initiatives and projects which were practically coming from the ground based on the concrete needs, the concrete challenges. And from my personal experience, what I've seen, such a global fund is actually the Women, Peace, Humanitarian Fund. I know colleagues representing from the Secretariat are also here today. What was important, and this is one positive practice that I think we need to still nurture, and I think this fund needs to continue receiving this, the funding. I will give the figures how much it was channeled, but from my personal experience, what was important is that the Ukraine crisis and the opening of the window for Ukraine and Moldova actually enabled immediately not only to get the funding with not strong requirements on being registered or have many years of experience. Even grassroots organizations who've never received any fund received the funding through the Peace and Humanitarian Fund, Women, Peace, Humanitarian Fund, for the actions they were doing on the ground. But what was more important from my experience was that what gave them, those funds enabled a bit of shift in the power balances in the refugee coordination setup, in Moldova at least. This is from what I witnessed myself. We were strongly advocating for such funds coming from global financing because it creates a different power dynamics on the ground. So the organizations who were funded actually were able not only to provide the assistance, but they practically were the ones who were jointly with us chairing the gender task force for the humanitarian response, meaning being the advocates and controlling how much we are considering gender issues, how much we are collecting the data, how much we are listening to women, particularly almost all Ukrainian women who were in Moldova. What are the challenges? What are the voices? So we, in a way, that power dynamics, in a way, I've seen myself first time being on the ground, that the organization were able to, they were active, there was no doubt about that. But through the Global Fund, in a way, they came in on the ground, on the refugee structure with a different voice. In the sense they have the funding and they are changing the narrative about what is important that it has to be considered in this crisis and where is the whole gender mainstreaming in a humanitarian response. Okay. It's not that everything was very well done, but I've seen important progress in terms of how we consider important gender issues when we're discussing accommodation, wash, etc. So on your question on hierarchy. Yes. The problem that we are seeing is, indeed, it's more difficult for the grassroots organizations, feminist and women organizations, to reach out to the funds. If they're not specifically designed, it's more difficult to compete with the larger organizations who have already a track record of reporting of positive audits, etc. So that's where the disbalance comes in.
Yeah, but I guess Happy was talking specifically about like other sectors having kind of other rules, that there are other rules that apply to them. There are fewer hoops that they have to jump through in order to get funding.
The fact is that I do agree that sometimes rules are the same if you're getting millions, and sometimes rules are the same if you're getting 100,000, oftentimes. And this is a challenge, and this has to be changed. And at the same time...
and let me just go to Monica. From a philanthropist's point of view, philanthropic organization's point of view, do you differentiate in terms of the sums and the kind of conditions that apply to grants that you give?
I mean, we are no angels in philanthropy, you know, and we continue to lack enough courage and commitment to fund feminist organizations and to do so in a manner that is comparable to other areas of work. We continue to certainly ask more questions than we need to ask.
Of women's organizations, of feminist organizations, you mean?
You just have to put the word feminist there, and more questions will be asked. You know, as someone that is a director of a gender program in a major philanthropic organization, I do feel that I have to give more explanation for...
Why is that? I mean, what's going wrong?
What's going on is we lack courage and commitment.
Yeah, but let's also
enough of a conscience.
Let's be frank here. Is there also is a feminist organizational narrative, does that need to be better? Is this purely one-sided? What's going on? Because things have to change.
No, we are patriarchal institutions. You know, there is no question about that. We are institutions that are that continue to have a colonial mentality. We are continue to rule, to design strategies and to design the way we do our grant making as if we were 300 or 400 years ago, and we continue to be deeply patriarchal in our understanding about rights and who is a woman and who is not, and in what is the South versus what is the North, and we have to simply do better if we want to be effective in our work. At the Ford Foundation, yes, we try, but it's not closely enough to what we need to do. I mean, we deploy about $900 million a year, and out of that, you know, we have only about 60 grantees that are women-specific. You know, out of our 400 grantees that are receiving substantial amount of support for 5 years under our BUILD program, which is our institutional strengthening program, only around 15 out of 600 is going to Women's Fund. That is not enough. I go to work every single day with a deep commitment that we are not where we need to be as an institution.
What's the reaction when you share those?
The reaction is, you know, what can you imagine? They say, there comes the activist. You know, there comes the advocate. There comes the person that never stays quiet. You know, you have to, I truly believe that we have to go into those institutions with the clear conviction that we are there to change the way those institutions work.
Yes.
You know, like, we cannot just go in there and play the game. No, because the game has taken us to this level of inequality, this level of invisibility about the situations in different parts of the world. So, you know, philanthropy is no exception. Yeah. The other thing is we don't talk enough with each other and with government. You know, so we are all thinking that we have the truth and that we know what is the right thing to do. So on top of the challenges that we face internally, we have challenges amongst ourselves. So if you ask me why we lack trust, because we are patriarchal, because we still discriminate, because we still don't understand the urgency of the moment, and that needs to be changed. Yes, you know, I have a great and very supportive leadership, but to me, the narrative is not enough. I always say to the leadership, it's very good that you're standing with me, and I appreciate that's a first step. But to me, it's about how much of the 900 million that we distribute every single year is going to feminist organizations, to feminist funds, to women's rights organizations, to social justice movement, and even more. How much is it going beyond capital cities? How much is going to rural areas, to grassroots organizations? Because it's not enough. I mean, even at the Ford Foundation, 90% of our funding is staying in major cities in the world. That is not correct.
And what's that like at the African Development Bank, Melissa?
Yeah, no, I think this is a super important point that you're making, actually, because I believe it's also our responsibilities as MDBs, as donors, to be able also to move beyond the usual suspects, because it's so easy and it's so much comfortable to work with these organizations that we already know in the capital cities, while there is so much more work to be done in Yamoussoukro and in the remote areas of the continent. So we need to be intentional, and the donors and the MDBs need to provide this direction. So when the money is being disbursed to these beneficiaries, we are also being intentional, and making sure that we can involve these local actors that might perhaps need, to be capacitated, but at some point they have a role to play, because we need also to reach out to the rural areas, as you just said.
Yeah, Luc, do you want to add something?
No, I was thinking exactly the same thing, and maybe to illustrate, one of the value adds that we have within the World Bank is that we support countries. So we work in 36 countries that are the poorest, and a third of them are fragile states. It's really, the choice of countries was based on where the largest number of deaths occur. And so it really is the most challenging environments. But even within that, what we do is we support countries to develop their national plans. Usually it's the health sector strategy that often is not sufficiently prioritized, and frankly, often is not equitable enough. And by creating a platform where civil society can also push and pull and provide inputs, we see some shifts. So we've seen, for example, in Côte d'Ivoire, where something like 70% of their funding for health was going to tertiary hospitals. It's now flipped around as a result of an advocacy work, where it's 70% is frontline clinics and frontline service delivery. It's a big shift for a country like that one. And there's lots of other examples like that. More work to do, but it's that kind of work we try to support.
But I do think that it is important to not create a dichotomy between the capitals and the rural, but to understand the complexity of the kinds of players we need in a moment like this in history, and to also understand that this is a moment in which we should not back down or reduce funding going to organizations, whether you are sitting in government, whether you're sitting in the Dutch government, whether you're sitting in the Canadian government, in the French government, in the US. Many of you, I will say, you have a call to action right now to double down the amount of resources. We in philanthropy are ready to work with you. We in philanthropy are ready to build a pipeline of organizations that will have the kinds of systems that you need. And to my fellow feminist sisters, I want to invite you to challenge us more, to have a different type of conversation, to say to the same Ford Foundation, it is a moment for us to have a political conversation with you and not just an instrumental conversation with you. I need that kind of pressure for me to then put the kinds of pressure I need to put inside.
And can I say to that, Monica, and to all of you, we feminist organizations are ready to receive this funding. I think sometimes folks are like, oh, we don't know where to take it. We know where to take it. All we need you to do is to give us that funding and to give it to us in ways that actually works for us. Yeah. I think that's a key piece of it, because a lot of times folks will put a lot of money on the table, often not to us, but will put money on the table, and then you look at it and you're forced to walk away, because how taking that money means it actually can't go where you need it to go.
Maybe one additional point on supporting capital level organization, grassroots, and measuring results. I think sometimes it's the pressure on the organization, like to make miracles. We're talking about decades, hundreds of years of really exclusion and inequalities and gaps which persist. And then we expect that the results and how we expect in 3 years of major changes, because it has to be in a way that the funds invested we have to have return on investment. It's not so easy. Like, we are talking about transformative changes which need decades even more to happen. So sometimes it's unrealistic also on the pressure of what we what kind of results we set ourselves for, and what pressure we're giving also to the organization because of that. And it's not like we also are involved in that, like sometimes in our conversation with development partners, how realistic these expectations are. We need to share really the concrete realities on the ground and what we should be investing in and what we should expect as results. Because the first failure, we need to give this last point, we need to give a moment of even failures. We need to experiment. These are approaches that we need to take and to experiment and sometimes to fail, because next time we will be getting better. And the moment of lack of momentum for acceptance of failures, so we stop. That's not what we should do.
Can I ask a
Hugh,
question?
I see, just before you, Hugh, I saw you scribbling away there. Is something that you want to add?
Not something so much that I want to add. I was just taking notes.
He has a lot.
He's got a lot of homework.
That's true. No, but I was taking notes because I was quite struck by many of the comments that were being made. I mean, I think, as I was saying, I think we are trying in our way to absorb what we're hearing and to respond. Again, I'll just go back to the Women's Voice and Leadership Initiative. It was very much intended, and the effort was to try to do development differently. And to try to reach out directly to women's rights organizations, but there's things that we already recognize that we need to do differently in order to do that more effectively. So, no, I was really just taking notes.
But you can be very, very proud of the Equality Fund and other initiatives that you have taken.
Yeah, Happy, you wanted to add?
I have a question. I cannot pass up this opportunity where I'm seated with the African Development Bank and the World Bank to ask questions about your loan mechanisms and the translated debt. So I hold a Kenyan passport. When I was in San Francisco 2 weeks ago, I left Kenya, the price of fuel was 1. I went back a week later, the price of fuel had increased by 20 Kenya shillings. So everything keeps increasing. Many reasons, but one of the main reasons is because of the tax of the loan burden that our governments are holding because of the constant borrowing that they're doing, and that translates to costs of living increasing, so everything gets taxed. And the issue why I'm putting it here is it becomes such a real issue. Most public services are accessed by women. So when tax burdens increase, governments can't pay for hospitals. So when I was struck by this question when you talk about hospitals. So hospitals get shut down, public hospitals get shut down. Schooling, in Kenya we had free primary education for the most part, not there anymore because governments have to pay back loans. So when y'all are talking about, oh, great, you're doing but you're giving our governments loans, what do we do about that? And when are you just gonna cancel it? Because I'm like, come on. And when we think about it...
let him answer.
I can go back and tell my president that I was on a panel with the World Bank and they're going to cancel Kenya's debt, right? Are we there?
Happy, I wish I could
commitment
be happy on this. But actually, maybe a few things. One is the actual burden of the loans themselves, and then there's the utilization of them, right? So I'd like to address both because I think they're important. First, on the burden, I have to say I was a bit surprised to learn recently that the burden of debt is actually mainly bilateral debt and private debt that governments have, that developing countries have. It's not multilateral primarily. So it's not primarily the World Bank or the African Development Bank. And I think that's due to the mechanisms we have to regulate just how far we would enable or help governments or even allow governments to go in terms of indebting themselves, right? And that can be a little bit frustrating for someone who works within the World Bank because it limits the resources that we have access to be able to to do projects, for example, in health or education and so forth. But it's there for a good reason, and I'm glad it's there. There's also, within the World Bank, you have the more commercial side of it, which is for higher level income countries. And then you have IDA, which is a large trust fund where donor governments put money in. And the IDA is for poorer countries, and a large part of that is actually grants. It's not loans. And that's based on level of income. So that's sort of a bit of on the landscaping of why we're not seeing primarily the current debt burden, which is a serious problem, there's no question about it, is not primarily multilateral. Then one of the reasons we exist and the way we're structured within the World Bank is we fundraise for grant money at the GFF, right? So we've so far mobilized $2.5 billion from donors as pure grants. And we then use those to develop the plans that I mentioned. But those plans are always financed because we match this IDA, this concessional financing. And it encourages your Minister of Finance, for example, to allocate this, be more encouraged to allocate, for example, to women, children, and adolescents. Because there's a good plan in place, but also because basically if it is a loan, the interest on the loan is paid for by the grant that we're providing as matching fund. And so on average, there's $1 that we put in and $7 of the World Bank money. And because that plan is credible, it crowds in funding from Canada, the Netherlands, etc., around a plan that's more likely to lead to really strong results, so being a good investment, than maybe something that's not as evidence-based. Okay. So that's sort of what I would say to...
Well, it wasn't quite a debt relief commitment. I wish I was senior enough.
That's what I was looking for.
Okay, listen, I've got a question for the audience. For this, I'd like you to use your network app, okay? What do you think the number one priority should be for your organization to ensure governments, multilateral organizations, and philanthropic organizations move towards feminist funding? So what should the number one priority for your organization be? Mm-hmm. We're going to put that question up on the screen? Yeah.
Number one priority.
Let's get I've got to look at my iPad for the responses. Yeah, just to get a feeling. And maybe you can think about it amongst yourselves as well here. Get some answers coming in. What would you say it is for you, Happy?
Oh, I was laughing.
I'm sorry? Oh, you're laughing.
I was laughing at
We're just saying, I think we need to take over those institutions.
You need to. That's one way. Yeah.
But not just because of being a woman. But
peacefully.
Progressive. Feminists.
Yeah. I think the number one priority should be... I actually think it's a bit of a point that you're making, which is I think the number one priority really needs to be about long-term funding. Mm. So we work with 5-year horizons, not because our visions are 5 years long, but because the funding we get is 5 years long. Like that's the long-term funding we get for the most part. Yet we all know this, and we talk a lot about this, at least in the feminist spaces I'm in, which is voices on the political right, so the anti-rights actors, the anti-gender actors, those people have generations, 100-year-long plans. Mm. Yeah. And that's why we're seeing the kind of pushback around the rights that we've won, because they've been planning this for generations. Yeah. We're here at 5-year plans, 10-year,
longer term thinking?
No, we need long term. I mean 30,
and I'm also seeing here lots of answers around trust, around transparency, bolder choices, joining forces is something we haven't touched on here, but to what extent is that possible? That joint funding applications, I mean, that's also kind of a sensitive area as well. Mm-hmm. People competing for the same pot.
This is a moment, perhaps, Monica, we should talk about the Alliance for Feminist Movements.
Perhaps you can do that. I don't know if we have time for that. Someone's going to tell me in my ear. But you could... Go ahead. Let's wrap up with that.
I mean, I think that we have to continue to remain committed to building alliances, to recognizing that we cannot solve the scales of the problems that we have by operating on our own. So, again, that is my call to our government representatives here. you can work with us. You can work with feminist movement. You can work with the private sector. But you have to be transparent. You have to be honest, and you have to be willing to come to the conversation. But there is no other way. And we have to recognize that each one of us can play a different type of role. We did this with the government of Canada in terms of the Equality Fund. The government was able to put some resources, private sector was able to put some resources, philanthropy, but feminist organizations put their life. What more resources do we need? The Alliance for Feminist Movement, therefore, is a platform where we are hoping that we can push some actions for more and better resources. And what we mean by more and better resources is exactly that, long-term, flexible, so that we can get used to giving one-line budget grants. What that means is that you provide the entire flexibility. In fact, we at the Ford Foundation are doing that right now in Palestine and in Israel. We are providing resources in a manner that are flexible so that organizations are able to respond in moments of crisis like this one, just, so that they're not counting dollar by dollar. And we need the institutions and platforms, but above all, deep commitment to remain in conversation, to understand that we are not so unique as we think as we are, to remove some of our ego and be able to share the light, And if we do that, then perhaps we have a chance. Otherwise, we are not only full of bullshit, but in deep shit, like as a community.
Well, listen, let's just hear from the audience. Some people who've been giving some of those reactions. Everyone's clapping along. Everyone's very supportive and vocal of these messages. Who here is at a smaller organization and recognizes some of the challenges that have been shared here on stage? Trust, yeah. Okay, let's go over here first and then come to you. What's your name? Where are you from? And
I will tell you that.
Okay.
So my name is Frida Githuku. I'm the executive director of Roots Kenya. I can relate with what you're saying, especially as an organization that brings together grassroots women. We are in this constant mode of, reporting, filling in the PMF. We call them PMF, Doris, and the amount of time that we spend reporting to donors vis-a-vis the amount of time we should spend doing advocacy and changing systems, it's really unbelievable. And I think we need to shift that kind of system. It's unacceptable. It's unacceptable for us and for the grassroots women that we also work with. But anyway, I have a comment for the African Development Bank. I know AFAWA. I am familiar with AFAWA. Of course, it's a special affirmative action fund. My concern or question is to what extent is that instrument aimed at transforming the systems, the structures, and the institutional attitudes of banks that keep rural women, rural entrepreneurs, and indigenous women away from them, because we cannot survive on the temporary measures for the long term. And this goes to the ADB, but also the World Bank. To what extent are those programs influencing the institutions, the private institution, commercial institution?
Great question, thank you. Melissa, go ahead.
Thank you so much for the question. This is really at the core of what we're doing, working with these financial institutions to change the perception and to accompany them. Because in fact, it's in the financial institutions' interest actually to start better serving and addressing the needs of the women entrepreneurs and women in general. So,
but are they listening? Is your conversation? Our conversations?
I want to say that
levels?
It's the beginning of a journey. Change will not happen overnight, but we are working with them on developing these programs. Not all of them, but we will do it incrementally, right? We want to work with them to be able to structure these financing products and services that actually really respond to the needs of the woman entrepreneurs.
Okay, I feel like that's a no. That's a no. They're not yet having those conversations, but it's a not yet. Listen, let's go to another question because we haven't got so much time to hear from all of you. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is Pablo Aguirre. I am from the Hague Academy for Local Governance. We're a practice-oriented training institute in The Hague, and we do capacity building. And I wanted to just share 2 points, and I'll go in chronological order, meaning the first point is when we apply for a tender that comes from an organization, usually it's a Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we barely have the time to consult with multiple parties, even though we have to be consultative. Meaning we do not even have the time to consult the on-the-ground organizations that have more knowledge about what has to be done and what their needs are. But we try our best. If we get such a tender, if we get the income, the money, we also need enough time to write a report that is as long as a thesis. 18,000 words that you have to write in 3 days, and we bill our hours.
How much money are you asking for?
Oh, it depends. Our fees are different. I can tell you all about them later. But it means that fee that is being paid to us could be used in many other ways. So I completely applaud what Mama Cash was saying in the beginning, that the sheer time and work that goes into that also translates to monetary value.
Yeah.
And I'd rather spend that in another way. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Pablo. I believe we have to wrap it up there unless someone's got a burning question. Oh, right at the back. Really? Did you have to be all the way back there? Okay, I'm going to take this as the final question, and then we have to wrap up the panel. Sprint over here. Yes, ma'am. What is your question, and where are you from?
Thank you very much for considering us of the back. The back people. So I'm Njomo Esther Omam, the Executive Director of Reach Out, Cameroon. I come from one of the restive regions of my country. The question I have tonight, or this day, is to find out what are you doing to bring us grassroots organizations to level so that we can compete with those who are more stronger than us when it comes to funding. I'm asking this question because at some point we had a partner who came and supported us, and before we knew it, he sent for audit. And they came and said, oh, you did not do well, whereas they were the ones telling us, just do it quickly because we need to report to our funders. And we did follow their advice. And we were penalized because of that. Then another funder came, looked at us and said, but you are doing so great. Your achievements speak for themselves. What do you need? And we told them, this is what happened to us. And they said, forget about them. We're going to strengthen your capacities. And we'll make sure that you fulfill the criteria which is needed. And they did that. And do you know what? When a call for tender was launched in my country to have a humanitarian sub-recipient to the Global Fund, we went in, we applied, and we beat all the international organizations. So, what are you doing? Or what do you intend to do to bring us to level so that we too can go in for better funding? Thank you.
Great, thank you very much. Important question. I think this is one for the banks and for Hugh and also Monica.
Okay, I will be brief. Thank you very much for the question. I think it's also an important one. So there is a real need, information again, and we haven't touched on the information piece, but information is so important. We need to have visibility, and I'm speaking about the donors, the MDBs. We need to have the big picture. So this kind of organization and grassroots, we have very many on the continent. So recently we got the approval for a project that we will be kicking off in the next weeks, and that will consist in doing an exhaustive mapping of all the organizations, in 16 countries of the continent to really understand, who these organizations really are, but more importantly, what are their needs. And this is based on what we will be able to, to provide, the relevant support and technical assistance to bring, I don't want to say some of them at level, but to compensate and to address the existing gaps. So, yeah, critical.
Thank you. Very briefly, it is a challenge, and so great to hear about this mapping, because the needs are different and the ability to engage is also different. What I see are two things. One is for example, when we support governments to create these platforms, it's a condition that if they want any financing from us, there needs to be the space for civil society. It's not always been the case, that they had that space, and we've seen a number of countries now where that's the case. Who's there, though, varies. And so that ability to know who's in the country, and then are they then the people at the table representing the others, et cetera, I think there's a dimension there. And then in terms of the way in which we engage with countries on designing projects, they design them, but we engage. I was thinking of an example in Nigeria, which focused on community-based service delivery for improving nutrition. And there had been an experience in Nigeria on HIV, working with very small organizations, and it didn't produce the results that were intended, partly because of this capacity challenge. And so in this design, and it's the government that contracts non-state actors, so NGOs, but they contract larger ones with an agreement that there would be subcontracting to a number of others. And in that process, there's a capacity building exercise that happens. And over time, and we've seen it in other countries like Afghanistan, where over time, some of these small ones actually become the main contractor.
But that, I guess, means that World Bank isn't taking responsibility for that capacity building. You're kind of outsourcing.
The World Bank never directly delivers projects. It's always financing governments to deliver projects, right? So what we can do is lean in, in the design, and then we also provide technical assistance to support the implementation.
Both of you, and then Monica, and we have to wrap up there. Very briefly, sorry.
I'll be very brief then. This was another thing that came out in the evaluation that we had done as well, the importance of looking at ways to support sustainability, that the funding sometimes that we provided was short-term, for example, and that puts a stress on organizations that need to develop a capacity, and that can take time. So that's, I think, a lesson learned going forward. The other comment I wanted to make, I think, though, was the importance of other donors, and donors also coordinating, too. So the example was given of having different donors come and talk about what was needed in different ways and having different responses. I think there's a role there for donors to communicate amongst themselves. This mapping exercise is also very interesting, I think, from that that point of view as well. And one final thing, when we talk about resources, just one I wanted to mention as well that I think was important for us, and I think for receiving organizations, which is resources to keep members and leadership of those organizations safe. I think that's an important contribution given the frontline human right defender role that is played, and important for us to keep in mind.
Okay, Dominica?
Okay, well, UN Women actually we're signing partner agreements with organizations on the ground for implementing programs. And one additional element is the institutional funding. So we actually provide institutional funding for organizations, grassroots, for strengthening their institutional capacities, meaning management of the funding, internal processes, and their accountability is very limited in that sense. In the sense, it's only directed to strengthen the organization capability. And this is, we have seen very positive outcomes on this, because through institutional granting, practically afterwards, organizations are getting more programmatic funds, not only from us, but from different donors, although we are not a donor, but a technical agency. Maybe I want to just point one thing on the priority you mentioned at the end. Yeah, I want to flag about the movements and alliance. I think the Generation Equality Forum that UN Women initiated, where we have governments, multilaterals, NGOs participating, and the feminist movement and the Leadership Action Coalition, they provide one important recommendation, which is really to set these funding targets. And the funding target is by 2026 to double the global annual growth rate of funding from all sectors committed to women-led and women feminist movements, organization in all their diversity. So this is a movement actually in the frame of the feminist movement and Leadership Action Coalition that we should strive to continue supporting. And I think that target is important
to share. Thank you for sharing. Monica.
3 things. And these are things that we are experimenting more and more and more with. Number one is we increase the percentage of a grant that goes for administrative expenses from 12% to 30%. I hope that others who are here can also do that. So now you can take 30%, even if it is a project grant, for that to pay some of your expenses. Number two, in a period of 3 years, we went from 80% project support, because as we know, we want to control everything, to 80% general support. So that's the second thing. And number three, I will say, we also, what can I say? Continue to not leave our board of trustees, our leadership alone in making decisions.
You gently
about moving money to organizations. But I would say for an institution like the Ford Foundation, our strategy on how we support grassroots organizations is working with feminist funds, with women's rights organizations that are essential in democratizing access to resources around the world.
Okay, we have to leave it there. Thank you very much. Happy. Yes, okay. Okay.
So I think to the question that was raised, I think one of the ways that we actually build capacity of people is give them the money. People will not learn how to manage money. So you can't suddenly expect an organization that has been working on a $30,000 grant to manage 100 million. It's not possible. Give them 100 million and then support them to figure out how to work with that 100 million. To that effect, I want to lift up alliance work. So in 2015, or was it 2016, the Dutch government set up the Leading from the South Fund, which is money going directly to women's funds, who we can manage the money and do it well. Money going directly to women's funds so that they could move it to grassroots organizations around the world. That was one part. That's what the Dutch government did. They put that money on the table. Private foundation, folks like Ford Foundation and others, came in and gave these same women's funds support so that they could build up their mechanisms to do that funding, or to how to manage that funds in ways that is supportive of movement building. Both things happen. So give us the money, the big money, not the small money, the big money, and then we can figure out how to build up our mechanisms to support.
Thank you very much indeed. We have to leave it there. I'm sorry. No, we have to leave it there. Another big round of applause, please, for all of our panelists. Happy Monica.
Ready to go.
Thank you very much, guys. Okay, we are going to put you guys to work for a short amount of time now, okay? Bearing in mind everything that we just heard about these different strategies that are involved in raising funds, I want to give you some homework. How do you do that in practice? Okay, for this, it's going to be a bit of an exercise. I'm going to put you in pairs, okay? And in this pair, one of you is going to be proposing all the ideas. Your task is to fund a women's organization, a feminist organization, full stop, okay? And one of you is going to be proposing all the ideas as to how you're going to do that funding. And the second person in the pair is going to respond to all the ideas with yes and. Okay? So whatever the ideas are, and I want them to be big, I want them to be ambitious, you've got unlimited amount of money. Luke has just decided to, out of the goodness of his heart, give you the World Bank checkbook. So I want you to get into pairs. I'm going to give you 2 minutes for this exercise. One of you is pitching the ideas, so decide who's pitching the ideas, and the other person is going to respond with yes and. So I want to see how the ideas grow from that point, okay? So get yourselves, oh, don't look. I've got someone here like, give it a shot, okay? So get into pairs and try the exercise. Your 2 minutes starts now.
I say, well, they are not properly invited, like your organization. It's true. They are everywhere, but not about the happening.
Yeah. Okay, that is 2 minutes, okay? I want to... Didn't understand.
How do we do that?
I'm going to explain everything shortly, okay? Don't worry. Okay, let's bring it down. Is there anyone who actually did the exercise, first of all?
I wanted.
You wanted to do it, but someone didn't. You two did the exercise. No one here did the exercise. Naughty, naughty. You two are the only ones who did the exercise, I believe. Yeah? I'm going to come over to you. Okay, shh, everyone. I'll explain what the thinking behind the exercise is, but let's see how it actually went for the two of you. Who was proposing ideas?
I was proposing the idea.
Okay, what was your idea?
Well, I live in Amsterdam, so I thought let's propose something
local.
I was proposing something for women.
Sorry, let's bring it down over here, guys. Nearly done. If you have a conversation, please feel free to leave the room. Yeah.
In areas where there's high level of poverty, so to start their enterprises locally. So I was asking, my colleague here too, if they could fund their initiatives, and then she kept asking.
She kept saying yes and?
Yes.
And then what happened as a result of that?
Well, I was trying to explain why we wanted to do that, but then at some point I wanted to give her the words. So I was asking her, well, what do you need from us, or what is, and that didn't work anymore.
Sure, okay. Well, let me explain the thinking behind this part, and then maybe it will make more sense for the next part that you're going to do. Because this part is about showing that no idea comes out fully formed, right? In a lot of, hands up here who's ever pitched an idea at work. Just hands up, any kind of idea, yeah. And hands up who's had an idea shut down, killed. It's too expensive, we've seen it before, it'll never get done, that kind of thing. Yeah, I would expect probably all hands have been up. But the more that we actually, in those positions, kind of suspend judgment and really try and understand why the other person is proposing the idea that they're proposing, the more likely that you're actually going to nurture an idea together and build it up and create something bigger. Because, I mean, in that example over there, did your idea get bigger or smaller or not really because you didn't do the exercise in that way? Yeah, exactly. So it gets bigger because now I would like you to do the same exercise, but the person who is responding to the ideas is the kind of embodiment of the risk-averse funder. Someone who kills ideas, someone who is too worried about the measuring aspect, the evaluation aspect, the capacity aspect. So I want you to embody that person, the risk-averse funder, okay? So the same person is still proposing the ideas and just make it idea after idea. You have to get this funded, okay? Let's see how this works. 2 minutes starts now, okay? And you should respond with no because. So the first part of the exercise, you were responding with yes and now when you hear these ideas and you feel that you are the risk-averse funder, I want you to respond with no because. Okay? Go ahead. You and I are going to do it together. We're going to do it together. Okay.
That would be great.
Can we turn my mic off for a second? Great, good.
Yeah, my idea.
Okay, what's your idea? Go ahead.
My name is Saprabana. I'm Director of Gender Concerns International. It's a Dutch organization. Apart from other works, I'm initiator of observing election from gender perspective.
Okay, great.
So we observe elections, all women-led mission.
And what is your idea that you want to pitch to me?
Yes, my idea is that feminist foreign policy could sponsor this mission that has already been funded few times by Ministry.
No, because it's already been funded so many times, so I'm a bit nervous about duplicating it. I don't want to do that.
All right. It is an idea that needs a sponsor,
and it's a very political thing, so that's why I need a scholar.
Because I want to stay, this can't be political.
Okay, so it's not political, but it's about, feminist foreign policy is about representation.
Yes.
And the project idea is to observe electoral process which brings women into governance, and governance bring...
No, because, I really want you to hit all of the 4 R's. It's just representation.
All right. What were the 4 R's? Because we have 3 R's. yes. I understand.
Rights, reality check, representation, and...
It fulfills all 4.
See, you're good at it. You're really good at it. Okay, the 2 minutes is up. Well, I had a very enjoyable session over there. For the same pair I talked to before, how was that experience this time for the person who was pitching the ideas? How did it feel to go through that exercise this time round? Yeah, I'm sorry, hold on one second. You're not hearing it on the stream. So it made you said you felt judged and...
Yeah, you're just there to justify your great intention to do something for your community. So yeah, it's really, it breaks a bit your dream.
Yeah, so it's annoying, it's frustrating. And what did it feel like for you as the risk-averse funder?
Yeah, it was funny because she talked in a very different way, like way more insecure. The other time she was very enthusiastic. She was like speaking with her hands, and this time she was like, "Oh wow, I mean, huh." And
so you literally see the energy kind of evaporate
sort of draining.
From her.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Did other people have similar experiences, different experiences? Should we just skip to the last part? Okay, listen, that's just a kind of fun exercise to give you a little bit of a taste. And what I'd love you to do is after this, after you go out, just kind of think about what would be the best strategies in the situations. You heard Happy on stage talking very passionately, giving great arguments, but the bottom line is the system is not going to change overnight. So between now and your next funding application, you're going to have to find ways to convince people because this work needs to be done. And I don't know what those are, what those ways will be, but think about the mindset and really try and understand where the other person is coming from because you've got to get your hands on that money regardless. All right? We're going to wind up this session with one final very upbeat message from the French ambassador to the Netherlands, I believe, Miss Delphine. Oh, is Delphine here? Yes, Delphine. Right. You have something very good to share. Would you stand up and
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
No, you don't want to stand up?
I am not the French ambassador to the Netherlands. I'm the French
gender
equality ambassador. Yeah,
huge promotion,
but I don't think my colleague would be very happy about this. Well, the room's half empty, but maybe a message about funding. I just wanted to share that, yes, it's hard, it's long, and it takes a lot of discomfort for governments and institutions to go beyond the traditional funding framework, to get rid of the rules, and to move to the unusual suspects. But I wanted to give credit to some of the governments, starting with the Dutch government, who created the Leading from the South platform, to also the Canadian government who created the Equality Fund, and to my own government, the government of France, which created today what is the largest governmental fund for feminist organizations in the Global South, which is not well known. So it was created in 2020. First endowed with 135 million euros over 3 years. Over 3 years, we funded over 1,000 feminist grassroots organizations in the Global South in more than 73 countries. Most of them are Francophone organizations who are even more underfunded than their English-speaking feminist organizations peers. And heeding the call from Monica, we decided to double down, so going sort of in the different directions than most governments. So we have just decided to double this fund to 250 million euros over the next 5 years.
Yeah,
from
absolutely.
starting this year. And I wanted to put out a call because we know that in most of the world, it is not well known that we have this support fund from feminist organizations. So we're looking to expand our geographic scope and to be in touch with women funds, local, regional, international, and feminist organizations that are looking for funding.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Take that round of applause home and share it with your colleagues, with your promotion, the news of your promotion. That's great. Okay, it's the end of the day. It's been it's been quite a day. There's a lot of information that's been thrown at all of you. Have a lovely evening, process it, come back tomorrow recharged. Do I have anything practical I need to share with you? No. Bites and drinks outside the room. So keep up the spirit, and I'll see you tomorrow. Goodbye.